Civilization. In this video, we're going to be talking about ancient Mesopotamia, focusing specifically on the civilization of ancient Sumer. Here are your key terms and key questions. By the end of this video, you should be able to define all those terms you see off to the right, and you should also be able to give decent answers to these 4 questions that you see here. Let's start by looking at the geography of Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia literally means the land between 2 rivers, and the 2 rivers they're talking about are the Tigris and the Euphrates River. The Tigris is the one on the north, and you can remember this because the tiger always jumps on top of its prey. So one thing that's important to notice about this spot is that it's geographically isolated. To the north and to the east, there are big mountains that people don't know how to go over, or at least it's very difficult, and everywhere else there's either ocean or desert. So it's really a little oasis in the middle of a bunch of rough terrain that people can't get around. It's pretty dry, but the soil is very good. And what this means is that when people shift to irrigated agriculture and start growing stuff like wheat, barley, peas, cows, sheep, and goats, it is very efficient. They're able to produce a ton of food. However, this also requires a lot of organization because it's very difficult to dig all of those channels. So what we see is with the shift to irrigated agriculture, as we've already talked about, you see the rise of the first states. A bit more at what the Sumerian city-states looked like. So there's a picture there. It's an artist's rendition. It's hard to say how accurate it is, but what I want you to look at is how it's this system of fields located right next to the river, and how there are these channels dug off the river. See the big one going through the city, and smaller ones branching off to water the fields. So even though it never really rains in Sumeria, they're able to grow lots and lots of crops by using the river water. So anyway, so the Sumerian city-states, they're called city-states because they are cities, but each city is its own independent government. Nobody rules over these cities. Each city is kind of like a little mini kingdom. And each one of these cities has its own king. And so on top of this, each city-state was basically self-sufficient. They grew all the stuff they needed for themselves. And at first there was relatively limited trade between these different city-states. They were basically like little islands of civilization separated by miles and miles of wilderness, usually deserts or swamp. So this is the very beginning of civilization. It's just little isolated cities. In these cities, we see a social system develop that we call social stratification or social hierarchy. And what this meant is there was basically a pyramid structure in that society where kings ruled over everybody. And then there was a middle group that consisted of like priests and soldiers and skilled craftsmen who got some benefits. And then at the very bottom, the largest part of the pyramid, were the peasants. The peasants basically grew all the food and gave most of their food up in return for the protection of the soldiers and the stuff the craftsmen make and the divine blessings of the priest. And so that was a system of social stratification that began in ancient Sumer, and that basically continues for most of civilization. We will see the same sort of pyramid structure in every civilization that we study. And another thing we see in Sumeria is monumental architecture. Huge buildings constructed of brick, mostly. And this is stuff like walls, massive palaces, and also, most famously for Sumeria, ziggurats. They're these big pyramidal structures, you'll see a picture of them on the next slide, that served as temples. So on the top of this huge pyramid, they would build a temple, and there the king or the high priest would go up to the top of the temple to talk with the gods, and also to perform secret religious ceremonies. More about religion in ancient Sumer. So the sort of religion practiced here, and practiced in many other ancient civilizations, can be categorized as anthropomorphic polytheism. Anthropomorphic means man-like or human-like. Polytheism means that you worship many gods. So anthropomorphic polytheism is a religion in which you worship many gods, and these gods look and act a lot like human beings. And so the specific beliefs in ancient Sumer included stuff like the Mesopotamians believed that the natural world was governed by different deities, like there was a god of the sun and a god of the sky and a god of love and war and stuff like that. Also, they believed that the gods were not always very nice. The climate in Mesopotamia was unforgiving. There were horrible floods and droughts and stuff like that. And so they concluded that the gods punished mankind for no good reason a lot of the time. And so because of this, they developed the belief that they needed to continually sacrifice and worship the gods in order to avoid the gods' anger. And so this belief sort of naturally developed into a governmental system known as theocracy. And so theocracy means rule by a god or rule by the divine. And so what this means in Mesopotamia is that the kings who ruled the city-states were actually viewed by their subjects as being godlike, having supernatural powers. And so the king's main job, on top of leading the army in battle, was talking to the gods and getting the gods to basically be nice to a particular city-state. And so all of this is linked back to the Mesopotamians' basic beliefs about the nature of the gods being anthropomorphic and not necessarily very nice. Up in the top right, you can see a picture of the ziggurat, and you can see a big procession with the king being led up to the temple to communicate with the gods. Thing that happens in ancient Sumeria, and maybe the biggest thing that happens in the history of civilization, is the emergence of a system of writing. This is a huge deal both for the people at the time and also for historians, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the system of writing that develops in ancient Sumeria, for the first time ever, the system of writing is known as cuneiform, and it begins as simple pictures. So you can see there on the right, the earliest pictures were basically just like very childlike drawings of stuff. So like the donkey actually looks like a donkey, the grain looks like a piece of grain. But as time goes on, these very basic pictures develop into more stylized and symbolic images. And they have this huge breakthrough where they realize that a couple little triangles stacked in a particular way could convey the message of some actual thing, that they could symbolize real things with pictures. And so it's interesting to think about how writing developed, because of course for most of human history, for the first 490,000 years of human history, we didn't have writing, and we had to convey everything through word of mouth. The reason it develops in Sumer is because of complicated economics. In the ancient city-states, economics was becoming more complicated as more stuff was produced and different types of things were being traded all over the place. And merchants and governments needed to be able to keep track of all the various trades that they made. So, you know, if you were going to trade like 20 sheep for 10, like 100 pounds of grain or whatever, you would write this down by basically stamping out the pictures of the things you were trading. And this very basic system of recording exchange developed over time into a much more complex and sophisticated system of writing that people can still read today. But so why does this matter? Why is writing so important? It's really important for three reasons. One, it leads to the faster and more accurate transmission of ideas. Before writing existed, if you wanted to spread an idea to somebody else, you had to say it to them. And of course, this slows down the transmission of ideas, and it also makes the transmission of ideas less accurate. You guys have all played that game Telephone, right? Where you start out with one message, and after 20 people have repeated it, it's a totally different message. Same idea with writing. If you write something down, the message is not altered as it passes from person to person. Second, it leads to more effective government. You cannot govern a city unless you have accurate information. And the emergence of writing allows for more accurate information to get filtered up to the king so he can make rational choices with what he's going to do in the city-state. And finally, it's very, very important today because this provides a new way of understanding societies. Before the emergence of writing, historians were forced basically to look at archaeological and anthropological remains. But now with writing, we can actually read the ideas of the people from thousands and thousands of years ago. And so we know more about ancient Sumeria than we do about any other civilization that came before it, thanks to the development of cuneiform. The next big occurrence that we see after the emergence of city-states with writing and irrigated agriculture is the transition from city-states to empires, where a single power controls the entire region. And so what we see is that for about the first 700 years of Mesopotamian civilization, city-states remained independent. But then around 2300 BC, the first empire emerges. And this is the Akkadian Empire. And you don't need to worry about it because they don't really last very long. But what they do is they manage to conquer all the cities in Mesopotamia and unite it under a single king. And so this empire expands really quickly and then falls apart really quickly, but it sets a tradition that other people follow. And you see a bunch of other empires emerge in this territory. You see the Babylonian Empire, the Hittite Empire, the Assyrian Empire. And basically, what you see is that each new empire is bigger and more powerful than the empire that came before it. And one thing I want you guys to think about is, why does this happen? Why did empires get bigger and stronger as time went on? So here you see a map of the Babylonian Empire, and you can see that it controls most of the Euphrates River and also a large chunk of the Tigris River. But it's still really pretty small. If you jump ahead about 600 years, you see the Assyrian Empire, and you'll notice that the Assyrian Empire is way bigger than either the Assyrian Empire or the Babylonian Empire. So here you can see that it's conquered almost all of the Middle East and a large chunk of Egypt as well. But then an even bigger empire emerges. And this is the Persian Empire. And this, when the Persian Empire emerges, it is the largest empire that has ever existed. In fact, it contains something like 25% of every living human being. So it contains all of the Assyrian Empire, a big part of Africa, little bits of Greece, and also this huge chunk to the east that is known as Persia. And so what we want to look at is, we want to look at a little bit at the Persian Empire and why it was so successful. And one thing we want to look at is why the Persian Empire was so successful. How were they able to govern this huge chunk of the earth, the biggest empire that has ever existed up to that point? And the Persians adopt a number of strategies that end up working pretty well. The first is they implement a system of religious toleration. They say, hey, even though we conquered you, you can keep your gods, you can do things the way you've always done it. That's fine. As long as you pay up, as long as you give us the tax money we want, then you're good. Second, they set up a system of government where different people are in charge of different regions. So obviously the emperor can't be everywhere at once. So he appoints people called satraps to run different parts of the empire. So there might be one satrap in Egypt and another satrap in Mesopotamia. But all of these satraps are directly loyal to the Persian emperor, at least in theory. So they get their power from the emperor, and therefore they have to listen to the emperor. The Persians also set up a system of roads. They construct official roads to help people get around the empire faster, which makes trade better. And they develop one of the first systems of coinage, where they have official coins that are worth a certain amount. And the road building and the coinage together combine to make it very easy to trade throughout the Persian Empire. So basically, the Persian strategy is to make life better for the people they conquer. If the Persians can make life better, then you're going to be less likely to rebel, and you're going to be more likely to listen to the Persians when they try to get you to pay taxes. So those are the strategies that the Persians implement in one of the world's first great empires. Here are your key terms. Thank you guys for sticking in there. I know this is a long video, and I look forward to talking about it with you tomorrow.